Welcome, Tobias Forge of Ghost. It is so great not only to be talking with you, but to once again hear Ghost. Hunter's Moon, first new song for radio in 3 years, featured in Halloween Kills, the next installment of the Halloween movie franchise. Now, Tobias, was this song the result of creative collaboration or specific intent to be involved in such a horror movie project?
Ooh, I'd say both. I mean, the whole idea started in two ends, I think. As I usually do, across, when I'm done with a record, I always feel, I don't want to be in the studio. I just want to be on tour. And, you always get like, I think there's always a little bit of a side from in you that sort of suggests like, I'm never going to do that again because it's such hard work. And then, as a mother gets pregnant again, even though it hurts like hell, you sort of start writing new shit. I think that at one point during the last cycle, it was pretty easy. I was just sort of checking out, I was sort of reading up on the track Harvest Moon, Neil Young. And I was just like, Harvest Moon is part of the cycle, the calendar. Oh, yeah. And then I just found that like Hunter's Moon, that is a really rad title. So I'm going to write that down, as I do with everything that I find that is rad. Fast forward a little, I was having a talk with a friend of mine. His name is Ryan, who works as a producer. His company just happens to produce the new Halloween franchise. So we were talking about that, and he said, like, how would you like to write music for it, or write a song or something? I mean, anything that do you have anything that would be cool? And I said, well, I have a song. It's called Hunter's Moon. Barely existed. But as we started talking about it, it just felt, usually, when you get a spark, it can go pretty quickly. So by the time that conversation was done, the track had sort of formulated itself in my head in terms of what that title is going to be now. Because I vaguely remember at the time having the conversation that, that Hunter's Moon, I think I remember I sort of wrote it down that was around Halloween. So yeah, that I'm just going to sell that because that sounds cool. But then, you go into writing and you have a pretty solid idea of what it's for. As with many other songs that I've written, I like to invite friends or people that I like writing with. I show them something. And with this specific song, I co-wrote it with a friend of mine called Max. I said, I have an idea for a song, and another cool thing is that it's going to be, we're going to write it. It's written. The idea is for it to be in a Halloween track, and I've sort of already gotten the thumbs up to at least present it. So at least we'll get a solid no, and that sort of helps writing it that way. So I think the basic core of the track with the parts that I had going into the session, and with us sitting fiddling for a day, and it was pretty much there, like the basic core of the track. I kind of lost my thread here a little, but he's a very gifted guy. The guy that I wrote it with, he actually got nominated for an Oscar this year for the other track he has written for the Eurovision film. So that's cool.
Now, with the inspiration behind the composition, the way the music was composed, is there anything you were listening to recently, or that you pulled back from the old memory banks, that created the sound with Hunter's Moon? Because it is a little different from some of the other Ghost material of recent times.
I wouldn't say that I've gone through a folky period. I haven't, but there were a folky element that I wanted to have in where the verse sort of overlaps into the chorus. Without getting too technical, it's written in a way that it's a little bit more folky because of the vocal line starting where it shouldn't start. If it's a pop track, it usually starts. Everything is in fours, like 1, 2, 3, 4, 1, 2, 3, 4. Whereas this sort of overlaps. The vocal melody for the chorus sort of comes in on an additional. It gets too complicated explaining it, but I had a folky explanation when I sat with Max originally, saying that I want it to be like this. It sounds kind of like this, and it's a little bit like Simon Garfunkel. It's a little bit like that, and it's a little bit this, and but I still want it to be like an upbeat, up tempo sort of rock song with like a steady sort of Joy Division-y, Sisters of Mercy sort of beat, a bass, that sort of thing. So it's not exactly inspired by anything that I was like completely down with at that time. I listen to a lot of different music all the time, and have been throughout all my life. So it's like whenever I write something, whenever I work, the inspiration or my sort of the palette of the references that I'm sort of doing could be anything from Euro disco to black metal. It's whatever sort of pops into my head at the time, mixed.
Folky influences. Okay, now that makes total sense, because what I said to Angelo and to Reagan Miner the first time that I heard it, and then I heard it a second time, I went, this is going to sound crazy, but I hear Jethro Tull from the songs from the Wood era, and that was folk metal. So maybe that's where I picked up that little sonic association.
Absolutely. I've spent a great deal of time listening not only to Jethro Tull, but a lot of that, obviously a lot of eclectic prog from the time, but also like you have to remember that nowadays I think people sort of refer to Jethro Tull and Yes and Genesis as like eclectic. Back in the days, they were big rock bands. They sold a lot of records. They were huge. But I've listened a lot to those bands and also some more hardly known things. So I have a lot of sort of prog in me. The first, I think I might have told you this story before, but when I started playing guitar, meaning basically I started, as long as I've played guitar, I've sort of written things and tried to compose things. But I used to, and still do when I have time, used to spend a lot of time playing guitar to the stereo. So I played guitar to whatever I heard. That, of course, have colored my way of writing, because I sat with the TV on and just played with the TV or the radio. But the one record that had a huge importance for me and very inspirational was a Pink Floyd record called A Nice Pair. And A Nice Pair, even though it came out in 1973, which was obviously way before I was born, but that was the first record that I got that was my own Pink Floyd record. I'd heard Pink Floyd before because we had records in our home, but that was the first that I got. And that is comprised of the two first Pink Floyd records. So it's A Saucer Full of Secrets and A Piper at the Gates of Dawn. Obviously, Piper at the Gates of Dawn is like the most weirdest rock ever. Very, very LSD. And I love that. And A Saucer Full of Secrets. And so much of listening to that, you can hear that in mixed with my writing. If you listen to everything that I've written, if you ever get the chance, don't spend your time doing that. But if you do, you can hear a lot of that in there. A lot of chord progressions, a lot of the weirdness, a lot of the quirkiness of, obviously on the first record, it was Syd Barrett, but then moving forward, he was not there. But a lot of that colored my way of writing. And, it's still melodic, but it has weird chord changes, weird melodies. Everything is kind of spooky, even if it's sort of a happy song. It has a spooky vibe. And I've never really been able to, and I don't think I want to, but I've never sort of been able to wash that off. I can't really write happy. I always write weird.
I knew I heard a lot of Floyd in there, and I'm not talking about the stuff from The Wall and Dark Side that everybody knows, but what you're talking about, that's some great early progressive experimental metal. And still to this day, one of my favorite all-time videos is the Pink Floyd at Pompeii with that performance of Set the Controls for the Heart of the Sun.
Oh yeah. Oh yeah.
And that's
Yeah,
right.
I lack
Weird.
superlatives, like positive superlatives to sort of underline what you just said. I'm just going to say yes. Damn right.
It's outstanding material. Well, it's a sound that's not being done a lot, which might contribute a lot to memorableness of Ghost songs if there are more to come eventually, like Hunter's Moon. Now, is that a foreshadowing? Fans are going to see that as a foreshadowing of other new songs when you hit the road with Volbeat in 2022. Is this the only new song you'll play, or are there going to be any works in progresses that'll get a live audition?
I can't be too clairvoyant at this point. As we get closer or further into the new year, there might be a comprehensive sort of mound of tracks hitting everyone who's interested. We have in the past done that where you come out before a record is out and you start playing a lot of new songs. There will be new songs, but there won't be as many, for a simple reason, is that we are playing together with Volbeat. So, we're not going to play 3 hours each. So we're going to, save a little till the record is out, and some of the songs have sort of gotten its place within people's, at least, comprehension. But there might be Hunter's Moon, and might be a few, maybe another.
I saw some early press talking about how you've been giving extra attention to constructing the stage. Now, is there anything you can share at this time, as we're still a couple months away, that you'll either be doing or taking along to set the storytelling stage when Ghost appears live on that 2022 tour?
You mean gags or?
I mean,
Yeah.
what's the stage going to look like, and I don't want to say what surprises are you going to bring, but what kind of hint can you give to what we're visually going to see when we come watch that show?
I think, a sort of a grown, sober answer is that it's going to be a continuation of what you've seen, but improved. A lot of the things that my take on staging, especially for us, is that since we are a quite large ensemble of people playing, you have to be mindful sometimes of the static players. I mean, static meaning the drummer and the keyboard players, and the ones that are sort of they're put in place on a pedestal, literally someplace. And then it's the four of us sort of running around. And you always want to have that stage sort of laid out so that it's practical, but looking really cool. I think that what we're looking at right now is definitely a huge improvement of what we did on the last tour cycle. However, kind of like Pink Floyd, who had the circle, that they showed clips in throughout their show, we also do have, a reoccurring thing with the sort of the chapel on stage with the big church windows. And so that is obviously going to sort of stay, but it's going to be a different church, a different thing. But I think it's going to be really cool.
Well, one thing I noticed as I've seen Ghost now, the third time I've seen you play, each one gets more elaborate. Each one has a larger investment. And on that last tour cycle, it was probably the closest thing rock fans seen to Trans-Siberian Orchestra without being Trans-Siberian Orchestra. The level of presentation with all the visual aspects that were going on, it just gave it was easy to get lost in the length of the show without feeling like you were in a lengthy show. So that's one heck of I don't know the way to say it. That's one heck of a compliment to say you put on one of the longer shows. So do you ever get just exhausted after that kind of a run?
Of course, if you can feel fatigue. I think that the only thing that could be tiresome sometimes, which is definitely the only one of the few backsides I can see of sort of making it. I mean, if you're from perspective where as a kid who was interested in rock music and live rock, as in arena bands playing in front of thousands of people, touring all over the world and all that, there was one aspect that I had read about. I saw interviews of bands saying that, but the one thing that can be a little bit Groundhog Day is that when you're playing these sport arenas, most sport arenas are constructed almost identically, and they're almost always placed some place in town where it's very far from everything else. So as opposed to when you played theaters, old theaters, like old turn of the century theaters, are also sort of constructed similarly. They look sort of the same way all the time, but they're always placed in town. So when you're out on these winter runs and it's bad weather and all that, you tend not to see much. You tend to be inside a lot, and it can go days without you seeing daylight. That is a little bit weird. So you have to make a bigger, as much as you're putting investment into the show, you have to invest into taking care of yourself and people around you to sort of make sure that on a day off, like, let's go out and do something. We need to see something. You need to take walks. Everybody needs to stay in shape, and everybody needs to sort of, get impressions. Because if you just walk around here, sooner or later, you're going to get, you're going to feel weird if you don't see daylight. And then it's such a strange thing, especially for us metalheads, who grew up with staying indoors, listening to music instead, and not getting too much sun, how gravely important it is to get sunlight and see daylight. And I'm a very nocturnal person, but that is one thing I've learned and sort of gotten reminded of from touring.
The Cardinal Copia is now a Papa. Was there a big party? Celebration time. Hey, you've been promoted.
Yes, but he, obviously he has been anxiously awaiting his actual sort of arrival. So we postponed the party until, what is it, January 25th next year.
Right. Ghost Chapter 9, Whom It May Concern. Papa Emeritus 4 specifically says he's getting ready for everything coming up. So maybe the everything is a nightly party of celebration for his anointment.
Yes. Yeah, and maybe growing a mustache. Now, we shaved it off, as people noticed.
He's got a new look. And I'm sure we'll be seeing more episodes soon. Now, growing up in Sweden, Tobias, a country that only started celebrating Halloween, I think just like a little over 20 years ago in the 1990s. When did you first become a fan of the creepy, spooky things associated with the holiday?
The first real memory I have of that, we do have a holiday of essentially like a bank holiday, and it's called All Hallows Eve, but that has always been different. That's never had any commercial, it's never been a commercial experience, but it serves the same purpose of honoring the dead, and you go light a candle at the graves and all that. But the concept of the commercial Halloween was definitely something that I first heard of through horror films. The first real experience I had of that was my mother renting me Halloween 2. I was homesick, and this is the mid 80s. So it's like, even though we had like a big blockbuster sort of further down the street from where we lived, and in Addis once, because it was like just a little corner, and it was just the cheapest, like really weird, like 70s films. And one of them was Halloween 2. And it was like in this big soft pack. And I told my mom, like, can you rent that for me? Can you, it's going to be like, there's like a pumpkin head on. And she's like, okay. And she went down and rented it for me. My mom is so nice. and she rented that for me, and then she went to work. And then I sat and watched that. Fortunately, I saw it at daytime, but I was very frightened. It was very scary because I had seen horror films before, but, and I say this to this day, that even though obviously I lacked perspective at the time because I didn't know what the sort of Halloween franchise would come to. Obviously now we're sort of full circle because now we're part of it. So that's great. But, at that time, one thing that sort of set it apart from other films, as in Friday the 13th or Terror, we call it the Terror, Nightmare on Elm Street is called Terror on Elm Street in Sweden for some reason. So we always call it the terror films. That was clearly made up. That was sort of fantasies. It was dreamlike. It was not real, because obviously Jason got an axe in his head and sort of went up again. And whereas this figure seemed a little bit more human. He seemed strong and hard to kill, but he seemed human. Also, that the whole second film sort of starts off, I didn't know at the time, I didn't know that this, I sort of didn't pay attention to the fact that it was a sequel. It just started off right in the middle of the, it's just a continuation of the first. And most of it sort of takes place in this hospital. And that's always creepy to begin with. I mean, as a kid, I was terrified of dentists. I was terrified of sort of anything, any room that had tiles. So I remember that vividly, like how frightening I thought it was. But still, back in the day, they used to make horror films that was even though they were scary, there was always like a cozy factor over them. So I was never afraid to the point that it's like, oh, I'm never going to watch that ever again. It's always like, let me see that again. Whereas nowadays, if I see new horror films, based totally on just jump scares all the time, and it's never ever calm, it's always horrifying, I don't want to see them again because it just makes me feel bad.
You mentioned jump scares, and that's the secret to most slasher films. So when you want to have fun on a Saturday night and you want to get a good scare or get nostalgic and watch something from your youth, what's your favorite of the terror franchises? You like the vampire flicks, werewolves, or are you just a slasher kind of guy or something else?
The thing is that one thing I've learned, or gotten used to when it comes to family life, is that I don't usually spend as much time as I did back in the day just watching everything, because when I was a kid and teenager and even in my 20s, I would sit up alone in my room or my one room apartment and just watch like House by the Cemetery, and then I would watch Necromantic, and then I would watch Weekend at Bernie's, and then I would watch anything. So I would just sit and consume films whilst playing guitar and listening to music and drawing at the same time. So that was like my lifestyle, greater part of 20 years, I'd say. And nowadays it's like, oh, are we gonna watch a film? Okay, so everybody starts arguing what to watch. And if we start like talking about seeing a film, you want to be very specific. It's like, oh, we're going to see Jaws. Or we're going to see like, oh, you guys haven't seen The Exorcist. You have to see that one. And so you have to sort of sell the best ones. Whereas if I say like, oh, let's watch Zombie, people will be like, no, it's not good enough, or not, it's not, it doesn't grab your attention the way new films do. So you're always up against that. And, just recently, one of my favorite horror films ever. If I were to list my 5 favorite films, it is actually very mainstream, big, sort of corporate horror films. Just because they are the best ones, they are the ones that are most prolifically crafted films. And one of my favorites is Dracula, the from 1992, Francis Ford Coppola. And every time I see it, I'm just like overwhelmed with how incredibly well made and beautifully scored, and the everything is beautiful with that film. And it's there's no computer effects in it. It's all like matte. I don't think well, it might be like a matte painting in it, but it's like mostly it's like actual like dolls and just built up set, which translates weirdly to kids today. It's like it's slow, not very scary. And I was like, no, it's not meant to be scary. This is horror for me. Horror for me, like I see Fulci's films as well. It's cozy. Yeah, I know, I see that the blood is purple. It's cozy. That's horror for me. When I see, I don't want to throw new films under the bus, but it's like, it's not cozy. It's horrifying. I guess I get stressed from seeing that. But when I see Jaws, I think it's like, it's cozy. I want to go to Martha's Vineyard. I want to.
Yeah, Gary Oldman was outstanding in that film, so that's part of the reasons why. No, I was specifically going down the types of films, and you did say you like the ones that, even though they might get criticized for being of corporate type franchises, there's a bigness to them. There's something that's iconic in a way that it stays with you. And I think, Tobias, that's one of the things that truly makes a great horror film is you will want to watch it again. I can't tell you how many times I've watched the original Hellraiser.
Right. Oh yeah. Oh, Hellraiser, also fantastic. I mean, I think the first 3 films are amazing, and they were for a long time, for the longest time before The Ring came out. I would say, I think that when The Ring came out, that was like the turn where films got scary for real. But before that, if I were to list like the scarier of horror films that had that sort of angst, clouded, sort of hovering black over the entire films, it was Hellraiser. because that was sort of lacking humor. Well, there was like a few punchlines in there, like, "Oh, Jesus Christ," and he was like, "Oh, not really," that sort of thing. But it's very, very little. Whereas in a lot of the other films that we've mentioned, there were humoristic elements, and whereas Hellraiser, the first three had nothing of that. It was just horrifying, and that was really good. So that's like a little bit of exception there.
Clive Barker at his darkest. One of
Yeah.
I always thought when I looked at Cardinal Copia, I see a lot of Vincent Price from Dr. Fives.
Right. That is not a coincidence.
Now, when you were here 3 years ago, you specifically said to me that you have a vision for the concepts of the next 3 albums already in your head. What are you witnessing now, today, recently, or reading or experiencing that may be shaping or reshaping your current creative state of mind?
Well, ironically, the album that I have been working on that we're not talking about, the concept for that was also, I came up with that concept years ago. I remember that for some reason, someone can check this out. We played in Seattle in 2014, 13, 14, something like that. We played at Showbox at the Market. I remember that day I came up with the idea for this record, this upcoming record, because I got a book called, what's it called? Rise and Fall of Empires. The Rule of Empires, it's called. And so basically I wanted to make a record about the rise and ultimately the non-escapable fails and falls of empires. And that, you know, an idea that like that can sort of take at least me quite far. So once you get that sort of idea of like, oh, now I know what the pile is going to look like. I know now what not to put in there. And it was the same thing with Prequel. That was going to be about, you know, the great death, the great sort of a medieval sort of primordial threat of annihilation, which was, I guess I wouldn't say carnal, but maybe a tiny tad more spiritual and philosophical death, sort of with, you know, the ever presence of actual termination. Whereas this record about the empires, it was going to be a little bit more practical, I guess, a little bit more, I don't want to say political, but so it wasn't really hard to be inspired by the last couple of years.
Well, as a guy who loves horror films, still reads comic books, definitely likes all that kind of progressive rock from the late 60s, early 70s. That's right up. That's why Ghost is just so right up my alley. So I definitely am one who appreciates what you're putting out there. I don't care what it is. I still love going back into YouTube and watching that acoustic performance you did in our conference room when you did a version of When You Have Ghost. It's just one of those, you know, I think I watch, of all the ones we've ever taped here, I think that's the one I've watched the most over and over, just because it was so magical, the way you interacted with the crowd and what you were saying as you were introducing the song and pretty much telling the side story to the story within the song. So you've done a lot for us over the years, you know, going back to that last show in November. We really appreciate it. I just want to thank you for the time.
Mm-hmm. Thank you, Kevin. You've done a lot for us, and we always love coming to El Paso. You know that. I'm so glad that we're doing this on this upcoming run. You know, that's the thing with touring. You end up doing 25 shows, and every time you announce, it's like, what about this place? And you're like, I can't tell you yet, but we're coming around, man. But we just can't tell you. And now we're doing El Paso on the first one, finally.
Nice. Well, our fans, the KLAQ listeners and fans, are going to be really excited because they are going to, on Saturday night, on October 30th, 6 o'clock, they are going to get to relive that last concert that took place at the Abraham Chavez Theater.
Oh, yeah. I'm glad to hear that. Thank you so much.